All right, so if the objects have completely different lighting, different highlights and shadows, it's just not going to work. Now, there are some editing techniques, you can manipulate them a certain amount, but if you are trying to turn a shadow into a highlight, it's just probably never going to look good because you're just basically going to be adding information that is not there. Unless you really feel like you're a great digital painter, which is far beyond the scope of this class. So you're going, in the process of choosing your objects and the images that you're using, you're going to want to think about how they match up to make your life easier with the certain highlights and shadows that will work. Now that being said, you can, the flip technique that I did, flipping it either horizontally or vertically, you can do that if you find something, it doesn't really work for this teapot shape, but let's say you have like a flower in the middle, and it has highlights on the right side and shadows on the left side. But then you have a flower pot that has highlights and shadows on the opposite sides. You can just flip either one of those so that the highlights and shadows will be flipped and they'll both match up. Okay, so there are ways to still use images even if they are not lined up. In this case, for this bird, which is facing this particular direction, if its highlights were over on the right side and shadows were on the left, it would not work. Unless for some reason I decided to use it on the left side of the apple, which I think would, just would look bad. Okay? So keep that in mind when choosing your objects. Try to find images that already look as close as possible to each other. Okay? All right, any questions before we keep going? All right. So a lot of what we're going to be working with, again, is the lighting effects. And this is where a lot of the tutorials are going to show you different ways. There are a bunch of different ways of adding shadows and highlights. What we're going to go over right now is just actually using making shadow shapes. So, for example, we want the bottom of this apple. There's actually like a little tiny sliver. It looks like a highlight. It's probably just left over from the white background. This we want to look like it's the shadow at the bottom of the apple, and then a shadow underneath the apple. Because right now it just looks like a floating apple. We want it to look like it exists in this postcard world. That's the key. The difference between what I have now, you could say, well, you just put the objects in, you're done, right? No, we're not done because it doesn't feel like this apple is existing inside this postcard world. Okay? So first off, what we can do is add a new layer, and we can go fully manual with this. And we can go to our brush tool. I have the foreground color on black, and I can just go ahead and start literally painting in kind of like this kind of shadow shape underneath, and we can always edit it later. So we can take away more or less, but I'm going to just add a lot right now. Let me see what it looks like underneath the apple. And then we start playing with the opacity. We start getting shadowy shape there. I think it is way too big, so let me resize it down a bit. Okay, I'm going to keep it darker, but now I have to add a shadow to the bottom of the apple. So I can do the exact same thing. I can make a new layer, go to my brush tool, just go ahead and add all of this in here. Take down the opacity. Make it a little bit smaller as well. And then if you have a sharper edge than what you like, you can go back in with the brush tool again, and you can take down the opacity of the brush, make sure the hardness is all the way down at 0%, and then I can just very subtly start smoothing this out. So it's not a harsh line of the shadow. And then I'm going to bring the opacity back up. Let's really I'm going to make a new layer so we can get a little bit darker in here. And again, I'm going over very quickly. And then if you go too far, you can always keep adjusting the opacity of the layer itself. Okay. Now we're going to turn some of these shadows off. I want to have this part of this building look like it's coming over the bottom of the apple. So I'm going to duplicate the postcard layer, bring it above everything else, and then I can come back to my pen tool. I'm going to make a selection around this building, and I'm going to select everything. I'm going around the whole image, so it's selecting everything except for this area right here. Come back to selection, okay. Press delete, Command D to deselect. Now it is, we can even make it bigger. So let's say we can really emphasize that it's above the apple's behind it. And I'll turn my shadows back on. Then I would have to add some feathered edge around the building, which leaves some of this information behind it. I can go in, mask that out. So now we're already looking like the apple is kind of sitting inside and behind this building, kind of like in this valley. It looks a lot more like it's this giant apple teapot in this world. Okay, so these are the type of things you're going to be thinking about: foreground, middle ground, background, how the depth of the composition kind of all works together. Okay, some of these, if your image is feeling a little too flat, these you might want to add something in the foreground that can overlap some of your other objects, just so it kind of tricks us into thinking, yeah, this exists here. The apple, it's behind the building, right? It's got to be, like, our mind reads it that way. Okay. These are some of the tricks you can do to start making it feel like it exists within the depth of this actual little world. Okay. Let's go ahead and I'm going to show another technique for the adding shadows on the handle of the dragon. Because right now, this side of it, on the kind of the belly side, should be in a shadow that matches this side of the apple. All right, right now it is way too light. Okay? So again, there are probably 5, 6, 7, probably 10 more different ways of doing the exact same thing. I'll just show a completely different way now. So I'm going to copy, duplicate this dragon layer here. Okay? And then I'm going to come up to window where I can see my adjustments panel. I'm going to click on levels. And then when I have my adjustment layer, my levels adjustment layer, directly above this duplicated dragon handle, I can right click and press create clipping mask. Now this adjustment layer will only affect this top dragon handle layer that's right below it. So now if I make adjustments, you'll see it's only affecting the exposure of the handle and nothing else. So I can really darken this, trying to get it close to the same exposure level as this shadow on the right side of the apple. And then I can keep masking this layer here, go back to my brush, and let me turn the opacity back up. Now I'm masking it out. So I'm erasing the part that is the duplicated layer. So all that's remaining is the part that was in the shadow layer, okay? So now I kind of have this shadow on the belly of the dragon. And I can always continue adjusting the levels here. See, I can make it lighter or darker. So now I have a lot more control over changing those levels, adjusting them however I want, which could come in handy because later on you might decide, like say you have it like this, you're like, okay, this looks good, but you start adding other elements and you need to darken the whole image. You can still adjust just this adjustment layer lighter or darker as you need anytime in the future, okay? So I'm going to have it about right there. We would also do the same thing with adding maybe a shadow on this side, because right now it's kind of just awkwardly, the hands, the paw, the neck is kind of awkwardly hovering over the side of the apple. Our eyes see the shadow that's being created by the apple's stem. And so our eyes are wondering, well, why is there not a shadow like that behind on this side of the dragon? So let's do something else. Let's see if I can think of a different technique just to make it even more confusing. So this time, let's make a new layer, and I'm gonna draw the shadow with a pen tool. It's just gonna start off as a path at the beginning here. Let's say I make the shadow, I'm gonna draw around here. So I'm just kind of estimating what the shape of the shadow would look like based on the shape of the object. So I have created this shape with my pen tool. Right now it's just the path. So I can click here on shape, and it made it this black shape right here. I'm actually going to make a selection so that we can change the feathering. I'm going to go pretty high on this, 20 pixels, press OK, and then I can come up to edit. Wait, there's a different fill, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, so I'm gonna redo that. I want to make sure I had the right keystrokes. So I made the selection. Coming up to layer, new fill layer, solid color, and then pressing OK. And I had the feather way up, so it's really soft. This probably should have kept it at 10 pixel feathering. I can change the color of the shadow. So, you know, see, I can do this with any color here, but I'm just going to keep it black. Actually, maybe I'll even select the shadow of the underneath side of the apple. Press OK. Then I can move this shape around. Maybe kind of adjust it with my arrow keys. I can add, so it already has a layer mask on it. I can adjust it because I see some of this area here I want to get rid of above the apple, maybe a little bit around here. Okay. Kind of making it more of the shape of the dragon. I'm going to duplicate this so it makes it even a little more dark because it feels like it's a little bit light. I can bring down the opacity. I'm going to move this one a bit over. Let's turn these down a bit. All right, so this is where the rest of the time I would just be kind of experimenting with how much shadow do I want. You know, obviously I think this, to my eyes, it still looks like it's too much. It would just come down to making adjustments, maybe getting rid of some more around here. Maybe I can turn the opacity up, but then just mask some of it out. Might be a little bit sharper around that area. So this is just coming down to the time that's going to be spent on making these adjustments, okay? I actually think it looks better having it much more slight than I originally had. And I would probably do the same thing around the arm, okay, because it still looks like it's standing out a bit. I'm going to do the exact same process, but with, instead of using black, I'm going to do it with white for making highlights. Again, so in this case, let's do, I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to move it above everything else. Oops. And then I'm going to add another adjustment layer, again with levels. This time I'm going to make it very bright. Whoops. I have to make a clipping mask with levels, so right click, create clipping mask. I make this dragon much brighter. And then I'm going to mask out all the normal area that should not be highlighted. which is probably going to be easier for me to get rid of most of it and then just add the highlights back in. So I can do that. I can press X, which will switch foreground and background color. Come in, start adding the highlights around this side. Let's take the opacity down. All right, so that's add some highlights on that left side of the handle, okay? So it basically went from this to adding the shadows, adding the highlights, and now it's beginning to feel more like it fits within the lighting that's happening around the other objects, specifically the apple. And I would probably do the same thing. I might even add a little bit more shadow to the side of the bird, and maybe even boost some of these highlights. It's pretty close, but that's what I would start working on there, okay? Any questions at the moment? Okay. We can also need to start thinking about color. If I come to my bird layer, it feels like it's just a little bit too saturated yellow. So I'm going to find my bird layer. I'm going to add another adjustment layer. This time we'll just do hue saturation. I'm going to make a clipping mask. So now I can adjust the saturation, lightness and darkness, and the hue for the bird. I might actually make it a little bit more orangey, just a little bit, and maybe desaturate it a little bit. That feels like it fits a little better. This is just a little bit too saturated, a little bit too bright. Now that fits a little bit better with the apple, okay? Another trick that you might want to try at the end of your project is something that we've been doing a lot lately, adding like a film grain texture, as long as it's big enough. So I have this film grain texture I downloaded. I'm dragging it over. I'm going to fill it here, but then I need to move it above everything. I'm going to add a blend mode on it. We'll just do soft light. Take the opacity down a bit. So this is with it off. It's about middle. This is just a little trick that you can do to start kind of blending things together. So if like this bird was really shiny, and then now with the film grain texture, everything looks a little more grainy altogether, and then they start matching a little bit more. Okay. So just in whatever it was, I think about 40 minutes or so, this is where we were able to get. Now if I open back up the original, okay, so there's a lot more objects like the window and the shadow around the window, the bees. There's also a vignette that we made around the whole composition. On this one, this shadow, I think, is too much. The shadow around the head of the dragon handle. I would take this down. But you can see is also there's more shadow on the side of the bird, which I think works well. Okay, so just in that amount of time, we were able to start getting this to feel like it exists in its own world. Mess around with some of the adjustment layers. They can come in real handy. I can also come to color balance. I'm going to make a clipping mask over just the apple. I can start adjusting some of these, maybe making it fit a little bit more with the bird as well. Let's try this one. But don't be afraid to get crazy with some of the coloring. Now, as long as it looks like it exists in the same world, you absolutely can stylize your piece, okay? By looking at some of the inspiration, like Maggie Taylor, you can see a lot of these have a very kind of bluish, purplish hue, especially in the skies. This is a specific aesthetic that she is going with, but if everything starts fitting within a certain color palette or a certain look, it's all going to match more, all right? So this is definitely an aesthetic choice, but it's also a very practical choice. If she's limiting the color to make everything kind of feel more blue, with these darker shadows, it's all going to blend together a little bit easier, okay? You know, some of the tricks, like I guarantee you, if she's putting together this, you know, this water, I can just click up, this area of the water and the land on the side, and then see the shadow underneath the land. If this was a much brighter composition, this probably would not work. It probably wouldn't look good. But when you make it a little bit darker and you kind of disguise some of the transitional areas, then our eye will buy it. It'll say, okay, yeah, that looks believable. I can work with that, okay? Any questions? Was there any Photoshop techniques or things that I've mentioned that I was going to show in the past, or any that you are curious about that I can show while doing this demo and the screen recording? Any Photoshop tricks or techniques?
Did you do what you did earlier with the lasso tool?
Cutting it out from a background? Yeah, okay, so let me actually go straight from the very beginning, because there's a couple tricks here. So if you do a Google image search, I mean, you probably actually could even just type in, let's say, bird on white background. So, I mean, you can literally type it in and get these different options, okay? That's a very, easy way. You can also do things like bird PNG. And honestly, some of them will already be cut out. And the PNG will have certain PNG, depending on how the file is exported, may already have the transparency. I'm going to type in transparent background, bird PNG transparent background. Let's see. Okay, well, some of them are going to want you to pay for it. So, it may not work out well. But let's just pretend we are going to do that technique again. I'm going to get this hummingbird. Actually, I think, yeah, okay, so this one has transparency. So if I click and kind of move around, you see that it's not moving a white background. So this is already cut out. So, also just keep that in mind. If you can find it, then that will save you some time. But let me find one that's not like that. Little sparrow. Okay. Wait, nope. This is also... Okay, I'm going to get rid of transparent background. I'm going to do white background so we have the example. This guy looks pretty cool. So I'm going to save the image. This can go into your assets folder. All right, so let me bring in the bird here. I'm going to place it. I can go ahead and make it smaller. Maybe I want to even just have it like right, I don't know, we'll place it somewhere. It doesn't really matter for now. The specific technique you're talking about is it will place it as a smart object. I'm going to right click or control click on the layer. Click on rasterize layer. And then not with the lasso tool, but with the magic wand tool. If I click on magic wand, basically the magic wand will select anything, the color that's the pixel that you click on. So in this case, with a completely white background, anywhere I click is going to be a white pixel. The tolerance can also play a big part. If there is like zero tolerance, it will, I believe it's 0, it will only select purely white pixels if I click on a purely white pixel. If I have a higher tolerance, there may be pixels around the edge that are like very, very, very light gray, but maybe they're not purely white, but maybe I want to get rid of them as well, so I can have the tolerance up a little bit at 15. If I have the tolerance way higher, it will start selecting more of the gray. So it's kind of, you might just have to, trial and error process. I think for this, doing a 15 will be perfectly fine. Then I click on the white area, it selects. Actually, this is a great example. See? So on this little shadow, because this shadow here is not perfectly white, it did not select it. So I could deselect, I could try raising my tolerance, let's say 50. Now let's see if I click on white. So now it's selecting more of this around here. See the difference? Let's bump it up all the way to 90 if I select. So then here's the problem. So now it's definitely selecting all of the shadow, but it's selecting part of the feet as well. So you're trying to find the middle ground. Well, let's go back to, let's say, 40. Clicking on the white. We're not going to get all of this shadow, it's just too close. And then if I press delete, actually, I didn't even pay attention to the top of the head. That was too much tolerance. It deleted part of the head, so I was not even looking up there. So I'm going to bring it back down to 15, and then we're just going to mask out some of the shadow area. So then if I press delete, it deletes the selection. I can press Command D to deselect this area. And then some of these little problem areas around the feet, I would just have to mask them out, on my own. It worked really well with like the apple because it's such a sharp shape. This one, not as much. I would have to clean up around the edges. It's also a lower resolution image. So you can see, like, if I zoom in, like I'm seeing a lot of like pixelation here, and that's probably why when it's trying to select the areas around it, it's looking a little pixelated. So these are just some of the trade-offs. You'd have to go in and clean that up a little bit, with the masking tool, and then you can move that around. Oops. I gotta find it again. There we go. Then you can, man, come Come on. I'm going to turn off auto select because we was trying to select the texture layer because it's above it. So now I can move it around, place it wherever I want, and adjust the lighting and exposure just for that image. Okay. Any other questions? Does that answer it? Anything else? Okay. So if you can find stuff that is on a white background or is already transparent, that will also save you some time. Any other questions while I'm still recording or while I'm still have Photoshop up? Okay.